So, welcome everybody. We're going to talk about downtown Franklin over the years. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the different buildings in downtown Franklin that have been there over the years. We'll talk about some of the businesses that were there that I'm sure a lot of us will remember. Other points of interest as we go along, and that's where we'll do it. Now, a lot of my sources of information, the Franklin Register was the first newspaper that came out in Franklin around 1875, 1876. Franklin Sentinel from 1878 till 1978, I believe. Amy McCarthy Earls wrote an excellent book, Franklin from Puritan Precinct to 21st Century Edge City. It's an excellent book. And Stanley Chilson's collection of films and pictures and everything. Stanley Chilson was unbelievable. I mean, you're going to see some of the pictures from that. And there were these Sanborn fire insurance maps that provided me with a lot of good information too. And then other personal pictures that I have and postcards and things that people have given me permission to use, and some in my own collection. So, and I highly recommend the Franklin Historical Museum. They're always changing things around so that anytime you go, you're probably going to see something new. So I highly recommend it. Mary Olson does a wonderful job with her staff, and just a great place to go. And in case you're not aware of it, there's an online publication called the Franklin Observer. Every morning at 7 o'clock I get an email. It's like an online newspaper. And Alan Earls does a wonderful job on that. Keeps you up to date on things. There's a historical column that they do once in a while. A lot of good information in that. The Franklin 500. Who knows what the Franklin 500 is? Yeah. Well, the Franklin 500 apparently made it to the Urban Dictionary. Somebody posted it in there. So they say it was popular in the 1990s by high school students to meet up and go find out where everybody's getting drunk. Because we were all of age by then, by the way. Yeah, right. But that was the route that we used to take when we used to ride around. We'd first get our driver's licenses, and that's what we did.
You don't remember?
So what I thought I'd do is, I figured, what's the best way to show the downtown area and make sure we catch everything, all the buildings and everything? I thought, well, let's use the Franklin 500. Now, just to give you a little bit of a whet your appetite a little bit, here's a little video that came from my home movies. This is where Quality Auto was, back where the black box is. This is in that parking lot. Now this Corvette, this is 1967, and 495 was just being built. And somebody told me that the guy that owned this Corvette was either working on 495 or his father did. But whatever the case, it came up from California. Yeah. So he let me, he popped the hood, let me take the slicks on it. Look at the steering wheel. Yeah. And he did really customized work. This is a 1968 Chev Corvette, so he really customized it. Pretty sure I had a four.
On the cement machine. Remember how 495 was cement?
Oh, is that what it was?
His father owned those machines.
There you go.
Put down the stamp concrete.
Perfect.
It was originally 495.
Beautiful.
That's why he was here from.
There's Doug Miller in his car. Who's that guy? I wonder who that guy was.
Is that you?
No, that's that guy in the corner. That was Ricky Saccone in his Corvette. Yeah. And then who knows who this guy is?
Wiley.
Wayne Wiley. Yeah. Had a 64. Yeah. Here's what we need. The Franklin 500's got to have a starting line and a finish line. So what better place than Lola's Dairy? Because I'm sure there's nobody. Everybody knows where that was, but it's down by where Big Y is today, in case, you know. But the best place to be was a Friday night on a hot summer night under the tree right by the road, because you had a bird's eye view of just everybody going through the gears and peeling out, and it was great. Like New England Dragway South. So here's what we'll do. We'll start at Lola's Dairy. We'll pull out. We'll go up East Central Street, past Chestnut Street. Oh, and by the way, the Red Devils. That's a club that Danny's very familiar with. That was on the back of his car. And it was formed in 1958. I can remember as a kid, I remember going to, seeing a lot of the cars with those in the back.
57.
Oh, 57?
Well, they got 58 on the t-shirts,
Oh, okay,
but I'm one of the original ones.
okay.
And we started after Daisy's Dairy in a little garage. There was 5 of us.
Ah, okay,
And that's where we started. It was just before I went in the Army, and I went in the Army at 57.
okay.
It was a month before I went in.
Good, good to know.
T-shirts, they probably incorporated 58, I don't know.
I think so, yeah. Okay, well, close enough. And then when we get to town, we'll take a right on the bridge.
Yes,
Oh,
yes, yes, you're right.
we'll take a right at the bridge. We'll turn by Dean College, Dean Academy at that time. We'll take a right on West Central Street, maybe whip around the Franklin Historical Museum and head back to Lola's. So that'll be the route we take. And there we go. Let's hope that it's during the summer though, because if it's in winter, there was that sign in the window that said, "Closed for the season, see you in April." Anybody remember that sign? It's all handwritten, hand-painted. So the first thing we would see as we pull out on 140 is the racetrack. Yeah,
What year is this now?
that's 1937. Now they had trotters and they had thoroughbreds down there too.
There was 2. The midget track was inside.
And right, that's right.
What street was that? On
Yeah,
Star Market?
everything that we see is going to be on the right side of the car as we take our virtual tour. That's why we're going to catch everything. Like when we come back down East Central Street, yeah, that's right where Brunelli's is today. Oh, it
Are
was.
you going to show the monastery at all?
No, that's.
Grandmother used to own that.
Oh, really? Wow. Yeah. Okay. And then they had a real quite a thing all going there. They had the windows for betting and everything. It was, yeah, that's quite a thing. Yeah. And then they even had thoroughbreds too. But in 1946, they wanted to have night racing there, but the town found out that what was I going to say? Part of that land was on private property, so they said, well, we'd have to go to the selectmen for permission. But it was around that time that Bay State Raceway opened up, so it says, well, so racing went away on there. So. Huh. Here's something. They had these huge bonfires. This is about 1948 or so. And you know what the thing is? They would light this thing off at midnight on the 4th of July. And they'd come from all around. I was reading where cars would be lined up, parked along the side of 140, all the way to the Rentham Town line. That's how popular it was.
What land was that on?
And it would burn to the next day or something?
Yeah.
What land was that on?
Oh, that was where the racetrack is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep. And can you imagine all the creosote and everything? Ooh. Ooh.
You used to burn your own garbage.
I know. I remember that. Yeah.
Days.
We used to do that all the time.
Oh, sure. Now, in 1962, Brunelli Star Market started over here. And Brunelli's, the supermarket, the first Brunelli supermarket was across the street from this. We'll talk about that as we come back. But in 62, they decided to go over there. And it was around that time that they merged with the Star Market group. That's why it became Brunelli's Star Market. So, and then on opening day, there they are, and they're still putting the finishing touches on it up on the roof. But that was the opening day. They had a ribbon cutting ceremony there and everything. So now back in the day, if you got your paycheck, you had to cash your check at the grocery store or whatever. And so I had a card. Yep, that's me. Yep. Valid at Franklin only. Now we're going to go by 3 gas stations before we get to Chestnut Street. The first one was the Tulsa station. That opened up in 1964. Who were the 2 people that ran it? Butch and Larry. What were their last names? Ah.
Who was the owner?
Oh, okay, who? I don't know. This is a good one. All right, when you say, I do that too sometimes. I'll ask a question. Oh, crap, I forgot what.
Yanko.
Oh, okay.
Izzy Yanko.
Izzy Yanko.
Jewish fella.
Izzy Yanko, okay.
And hired those 2.
Huh, oh, okay. And then in 67, the year that the Red Sox won the pennant, Butch and Larry invited 7 Red Sox stars to come to the place. They had manager Dick Williams, Mike Andrews, Rico Petroselli, Darrell Brandon, Reggie Smith, Dave Moorhead, and Jim Lonborg. They all were there.
They were giving out photos of those guys.
Yep.
In fact, there's still a bunch of them on the wall in the Rome restaurant.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Yep, 1967. Yep. And then next to that was the James French Hat Shop. Yeah.
Lenny.
Now the next gas station was right next to it. It's owned by, it's called Fitzpatrick's Garage. And it was established in 1925. And when there was apparently a small fire on one of the pumps, that's what this was all about. But then, a guy named Leslie Hockey Miller took it over, and it became that. Yeah. And then, as we all know, Leslie's brother, Ken Miller, established a place further up on 140. The International Garage, exactly, right. Yep. And then we have this one. This was the Eddie Lamberto's Sunoco station. Yep, that's where Honeydew is today, that's right, yep. Now what happened in the, let's see.
29 cents.
Yeah, I know it, huh? In the mid-60s, Charlie and Jack Dunn operated the station as C&J, Sunoco. And in April of 1968, Joe Marino took it over. And I'm told that the guy in the background was Alden Stewart. And his nickname apparently was Sonny Stewart, which I think is probably why when you look at the ad, play Sonny Dollars. Can anybody verify that? I really don't know, but I'm assuming that's what it is. But anyways, yeah. Sonny. Oh, there. Oh, okay. All right. Perfect. And then in the mid 70s, Bob Gollitz operated the station. Yeah. And then we passed Chestnut Street, and now we're at Bessette Ford. Today it's Franklin Ford. But Bessette Ford actually started over on Summer Street, and when we get to Summer Street, we'll talk about that. Bessette Ford, and then Bessette Ford became Padalano Ford, and Padalano Ford became Franklin Ford. Let's take a look. We're going by Ruggles Street. We'll take a ride up there, and we'll look at the Badges and Dorico's Bakery. Yeah. Yeah. Can you imagine living in that neighborhood and smelling all that food cooking there? Oh, between the Italian bread and the pastries and wow, mighty good. Yes, sirree. Yep. Then they had a little fleet of trucks. That's Alexander de Badges. I guess they call him Santa. Santa. Yeah. Yeah. Now, I got a question. Who was Marty up at the hillside? What was it? Mpemba? Mpemba. Okay, Marty Mpemba. Now, was the Melody Club up there too? I think, Debbie, we talked about that one time, the Melody Club?
Ronnie's here, he'll tell you.
Where's Ron? Hey, Ron, was the Melody Club ever on Ruggles Street? Yeah, was it up by where the hillside is today? Oh, no, well, Millside, where Hillside was? Okay, all right. Because the Melody Club eventually went down to East Central Street too, I think, right? Okay, good. And then back up on East Central Street, we have Supple Motors. Yep. Now, my first car was a 54 Olds, so I know for a fact that car is a 54 Olds coming up. And there's a 55 right there. I know, huh? Oh, that thing was a tank. It was a great car. Now, somebody had a catering business down in that garage down there. Anybody remember?
Joe Lazzarini.
Joe Lazzarini, yep. After he sold the diner, he had a, yep. And then up on next to it, there was a little gas station there, and they sold Tidal gasoline. And then Tidal apparently changed and sold under the Flying A banner. Then after that, it became XSO, and then Exxon, and now there's a regular gas station there. I'm not sure what the brand is. Yeah. This is 1942, and if you're wondering why the cop is there, they had gas rationing. It was 1942, and the war had just started. They had gas lines just like we used to have in the 70s, but there was a cop at every gas station keeping an eye on things. And then we got on Alpine Place, and Frank Brunelli opened up his store on April 20th, 1950. Yep. SSPS was the name brand for his food. Alpine Place, yep.
Eating a meal and then turn left.
And then we get back up on East Central Street, and who knows who that guy is?
Vazella?
Guy Vozella. Gaetano Guy Vozella. Yep. Now yeah, I know, huh? Now his father was Raphael Vozella, and Raphael bought the property that was apparently owned by Dr. Smith. He bought that in 1927, and Raphael built that building, put a grocery store there. And next to it, he was going to put a movie theater there. And this is 1927, late 1927. So he was just about getting ready to finalize the plans for the theater. The Morse Opera House burned down. So then the Morse family said, well, we're going to build a new theater, the Morse Theater. So Raphael says, you know, I'm going to I changed his mind. So instead, he built a garage.
Boys.
Yep, Jim Malloy's. Now this is a 1934 picture. This is a 1934 picture. Now, he built this for a guy named Carl Vischow, and then it was taken over by Wallace Smith, and then Leslie Miller, Hockey Miller, took it for a while, and then he bought it. And then Jim Malloy bought it from him. Now this, I love this. You're probably thinking, what the heck are they doing jacking the car up? This is 1954. It was during a power failure during a hurricane. So they got very creative. Now this is at Malloy's garage. Across the street at Brown's garage, they did the same thing, and here's what they did. They were driving the pump because there's no electricity.
That is some ingenuity right there.
Yeah. Now, my only thought is they better have filled up that gas tank with gas, because if they didn't, they'd run out of gas. And then they had to go to Malloy and say, hey, I need some gas. No, no way, you're not getting any gas from us. So, yeah. But that's what they did. They ran the pump that way.
Actually, the garage doors now are on the other side.
Oh, yeah.
Garage doors are now where the
Right.
where they're big glasses, and they added on, I think.
Yep.
They put the garage doors on the other side.
Okay, we'll see that when we get to Summer Street, yeah. Right. And the bumper jack. Remember, we used to jack up cars. We used to climb under there with bumper jacks and work on cars. Oh, no, and no safety stands. Ooh, I cringe just thinking about it now. Now down on Alpine Row, and Row stands for right of way, Alpine Row, it was a blacksmith, the blacksmith shop. And it was George Sims that owned that. Yep. And then in later years, Alfio Cidetti bought put a business there too. And then in the 80s, a guy named Jimmy Crandall. Anybody know Jimmy Crandall? Yeah. Yeah. He established his place there, American Automotive. Yeah. And then while we're still on Alpine Row, Bullock tanks were built, and these tanks were constructed in '62. Yep. Yeah. Now, this building right here, this is, yeah, Franklin Furniture. Give you a little history on Franklin Furniture. Now that building, the first building on the corner, that replaced a building that burnt down in 1883, okay? What happened was there was a guy named T.H. Trout, had a furniture and undertaking business there. And then a guy named Robert McPherson came along and took over the business. 1 month later, the building burnt down. So this is November of 1883. Now, the Milford Journal said they said that the flames were so the illumination was so great they could see a pin on the sidewalk in Milford. I don't think so, but I guess it was quite a fire nonetheless. So McPherson moved his business up to a building up further up the block, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But then in 1890 or so, this building got built, and McPherson moved back here. And at that time, he partnered up with a guy named Farrington, okay? And then, a few years later, they hired a guy to do the undertaking part of it. His name is Leslie S. Wiggin. Wiggin, does that name sound familiar? There you go. He took over the funeral home part of it. So, in 1903. And that's why when you see the Wiggin Funeral Home advertisements, and it says established in 1903, that's when Leslie Wiggin started. Yep. And then in 1913, Farrington sold out to a guy named Isidore Saltman. That's right. His father, that was Freddie's father. And then the rest is history on that one.
Right away.
And then the furniture store moved into this new building. Okay, this building was constructed in 1890 or so, and then they moved the furniture. They moved more of the furniture store into there. And now we see the brick building. There's a large brick building. And Union Light moved over from across the street into there. Eventually, Freddie took over the whole block. Now, I guarantee you that baby carriage and that little girl. I guarantee you that the mother sit in the store, maybe paying the bill, whatever. I guarantee you there's a little baby in that carriage. How much you want to bet? I mean, given the times, right? 1942. Yeah, but the little girl was watching, so I guess it was okay. Yeah. Now, this building has a very unique history. And what happened was, according to a notice that in the Franklin Sentinel in October of 1887, Aaron Hotwell Morse, he's the guy that owned both blocks, he moved his gas house, whatever the gas house was, to the vacant lot next to where the brick building was. He moved it there before the brick building was built. Okay, so that building was going to be used by David W. Corson as a meat market. And he would auction off meat twice a week. So that's what that building is. Now, we remember that building because it eventually became Richardson's Market. Then Richardson's became Quinn's Market. Quinn's Market became O'Connell's Market. And then O'Connell's Market became the Woonsocket Call Office. And who was the guy we associate with the Woonsocket Call Office? Yeah. What was his first name? What was Dutchy's first name? Harold Dutchy Gilbert. That's him in 1936. Before he had, when he still had, yeah. And Woody Abbott. We're going to talk about Woody Abbott in a few minutes when we get across the street. Yep.
That later became a Pico shoe store after the,
You mean that? Yep. Yep. That was during the 1978 parade. Yep. And we're going to talk more about the Fico shoe store in a few minutes. Yep.
I got that sign in my backyard.
You got that sign, huh? Oh, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that. Yeah.
Beat up over there.
Yeah. The bulbs are probably all gone by now, I would think.
I'll work when I got it.
Okay, I won't ask.
Went on a vacation and I come back.
Ah, really? And right next to that was a little tobacco shop. Now, that's the building that McPherson moved the furniture store to after the fire. And let's see. Now, in 1913, they tore this building down to build the Sentinel building, which is where Rizzoli had his drugstore. The Sentinel had that's why they call it the Sentinel building. So that building was torn down for the Sentinel building. Now, this is an 1888 drawing of the town of Franklin. I love these. You can see the Morse Opera House has just been built, number 9, okay? And you can see the empty lot. You can see Corson's Meat Market, it's number 38. Next to it is the McPherson building. Then those other two buildings there were the William Spear block, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I put the red line in there to show you where Alpine Row would eventually go. Now this is a really cool picture. This is we're on Alpine Row, looking towards the Opera House. And you can see that the meat market building had not yet been moved, but you can see the McPherson building there. But there's the Morse Opera House, probably, if not totally done, just about. But it was quite a building, though. You know, they had stores on the lower level. You know. This is about 1886, 1887, I'm thinking. You know, and we're going to go around when we go by on the way back to Lola's. We'll talk about that one. There's the Sentinel building. I love this advertisement. So he says to the wife, the E&W does a fella's shirts the way they ought to be done. What's his wife saying? Well, you don't like the way I do them? Take them to them, hey. But anyway, unbelievable. All right, here's the ultimate trivia question. E and W. Anybody? That's going to be a tough one. A guy named Charles Erlandson and Guy Woodworth. Now, when we get to Thunderbird Cleaners, you're going to notice that it says E and W Laundry. I got a funny feeling that Charlie Hooper must have merged the Thunderbird Cleaners with E and W. I'm guessing, but
'Cause he
makes
was
sense.
uptown, wasn't he uptown next
Yep.
to the
Exactly.
Taldos?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to see that.
Woodworth was down in City Mill, where he worked in mills in Buckley and
Oh, really? A buck-
that garage on Main Street.
Okay.
Brett, and then Brett,
Kenny Brett?
and a van Woodworth. I worked with Roland Woodworth.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. And then there's the Sentinel building when John Rizzoli had his pharmacy there. And the Sentinel Press was on the other side. No? Lovell Sports Shop used to be on the left side at one point. And then the A.J. Cataldo block. And that was about 1942. Yeah, it hasn't changed much, yeah. Yep. Yep. Now, the arrow's pointing to one of the buildings on that Spear block, and then the Waterman Laundry building was the other one. Those two buildings were torn down for the A.J. Cataldo block. And there it is again. Ron's Men's Shop was there for a while. Tom Keefe has his insurance company there.
Where's the candy store there?
Well, that's coming up. That's Jimmy's. Oh, no, we'll get to it. We're going to make sure we get everything. Yeah. Now, these two buildings are the ones we just saw. This is where Jimmy's ice cream was, right here. A guy named Amadeo Joseph Fiore Cataldo, A.J. Cataldo. That's him in the doorway. And he established a tobacco store there. And then he had a fruit stand there. Okay. And then those are the two buildings that Joe Cataldo had. This is a cool picture. I love the cars too, huh? Look at that car in front. Oof. Nice, huh? I know it. But then in 1930, Jimmy Cajallas would take over the business and would establish Jimmy's Ice Cream. And in 1930, where the liquor store would go, there was a little Redstone lunch and restaurant in there. And then, as I say, Jimmy's eventually would have his liquor store in there.
What was his last name?
Jimmy Cajallas? Cajallas. Jimmy the Greek.
Joe, we have some of the equipment that they had from Jimmy's package store.
Really?
Where the candy was, the containers.
Yeah.
And on the counter where they would make the fraps and all of that.
Yeah.
His daughter had given them to us for the
Oh,
museum.
Stella?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Go in and get a Fulton Coke.
Wow. Now this building, we crossed the bridge, and now we're on the first building on the right. They called this the Exchange Building. Not sure why. This picture was taken, I know it for a fact, it was taken between 1868 and 1872. The reason I know that, see that little cupola there?
Yeah.
That building is the first Dean Hall. It was finished in 1868, and it burned down in 1872. So unless they built the building from the top down, then those are the years. Now you can see there's a house right there, and that house has a barn on the back, okay? And eventually we're going to see another house identical to that built just to the left of it. A guy named Daniel Cotton built that one. We're going to see that in a minute. But at the time this picture was taken, that house had not been built. Okay? Now, Exchange Building. This is 1940 or so. A guy named George Peck had his store there. It was called Peck on the Square. And in 1932, he affiliated with the Independent Grocers Alliance, which was the IGA store. And what they did, the IGAs, was a new concept. Instead of the grocer going to the shelf, taking out this, okay, what else you want? You want that? You would go in and you would actually go around and do your own shopping and you bring it to the counter. It was a whole new concept back then. Yeah. So that's what IGA brought forth. That eventually was torn down in 1962. Oh, Fico Shoe Store. Huh. Dominic and Henry Fico. This clipping was from 1946. In March of 46, Dominic and Henry Fico purchased Sam's Shoe Repair Shop on Main Street. Now this picture was taken in 1949. Okay, and then in January of 52, they moved over to Depot Street. So there you go. There's the Exchange Building. Now, a lot of us remember Martin's department store in that building. Now, Martin's, was that the owner's first name or last name? No, not Kaplan, no. No, I always thought it was his last name. It was Martin Levine. Martin Levine. Yep. So what happened was in 1962, Chuck DeWitt wanted to expand the store, the Newberry store, into that spot. So what they said, well, we need some extra parking. So they tore down the Exchange Building and the Sentinel Building down at the end of Depot Street. And then that's what happened. They did. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Yep. But you can see W.T. Grant was still there. This is taken about 1960 or so. Yeah, nice, huh? Yeah. Now the arrows point to that Cotton House, okay?
Go in with the
I'm guessing that's about 1907 or so. Yeah. Yeah. And that building where the arrow's pointing to was torn down so they could build the block where Newberry's was. And now this picture was taken around 1927 because you can see they built the block, the first building where Newberry's was, and the house that was next to it is still there. Okay. Now this is from the Sanborn Fire Insurance map. And you can see the corner of Depot Street, that's the Cotton House there. And then the house, that's the house with the barn in the back. And there's the Exchange Building. Now, in 1927, we can see a building there where it says Fern. What happened was A. Simon and Son moved from across, they were across the street, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. A. Simon and Sons moved into that building. And that building became the third building that was built on that block. Now, the Depot Plaza that we know today was really three separate buildings. The first building was the big one up there, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. That's had 9 little stores in it. That's where Newberry's was and all those. And the third, the one, the furniture, that was like the third building on the far, right next to the Exchange Building. But the one in the middle, the building in the middle was where W.T. Grant was. This building was torn down shortly after this drawing was made, and that's where the W.T. Grant building was. The vacant building in the back was the Rusick Bowling Alley, and there was a fire in there. Stanley Chilson took these pictures in May of 1936, and I'm pretty sure that at that point the building was a total loss and they tore it down. But there was a bowling alley back there. Yeah.
My father was a pin setter.
Was he? Wow. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, because there was no automatic machines back then. It was all, stand up the pins, Yeah, that's right, yeah. Now, here's what I was talking about. The building on the far left, the big one, that's the first building that was built. And the third one on the other side is where the Simon store was. And I'm sure they extended it in later years because it was a little smaller. But the one in the middle was the W.T. Grant store. That was built around 1929 because it was at that time that Simon moved over to East Central Street.
I wonder how they took that picture.
Oh, that's from Google Earth. I love Google Earth. If you go on Google Earth, you can kind of, it's like you're in a drone and you can take beautiful pictures from it.
From that years ago?
No, this is a very recent picture. This is a recent picture. This is, yeah.
You see the yellow stripe at the gas station there.
Yeah.
See back of the yellow.
Yeah. Now, here's that first building. It was made up of 9 small stores, and one big one. 15, 17 was Newberry's. Newberry's took the first one. And then other small ones. The White Star Cafe was in one of those, I think on the far end. And there are other little stores in there, too. And then this is looking at the third building. This was the building that had Simon Furniture. In 1932 or so, they had Economy Grocery Store moved in there. Economy Grocery Store became Stop and Shop in 1938. And then there's a little store to the right of it. Mazzola Taylor was in there until he moved over to West Central Street. And then, now it's Stop and Shop. This is about 1940. And Gertrude Pellegri had a little coffee shop there. She was the daughter, Gertrude was the mother of Arthur C. Pellegri. And they had a fire in there. They think it was a cigarette that did it in 1942, and they closed the business after that.
Was there an A&P in the center of town too? somewhere?
There was, yeah. There was one. There was one in the A.J. Cataldo block. There was one in the Morse block, and I think we're going to see a picture of that. Then they moved over to West Central Street.
Yes.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that one too. Yeah. So. Make sure. Okay. This is a W.T. Grant store. Right next to this, on the right, was First National Food Store. Anybody know what W.T. Grant stood for? W.T. William Thomas Grant. Oh, for that matter, how about J.J. Newberry? Anybody know what J.J. stood for? John Josiah Newberry. Now, December of 1944, there was a big fire in the block. The fire was contained to the big store, the big building. W.T. Grant only suffered smoke and water damage. Because what happened was, because there were 2 separate buildings, there was a natural firewall between the 2. And you can see where Martin's department store was in this building. That's when Martin's would move to the Exchange building. This is 1944. Yeah. And then in 1946, all these cars were parked there because they had the grand reopening of J.J. Newberry's, which had now expanded into the old Martin's store. And you can see W.T. Grant and First National was still there, and Stop and Shop. Now, it was also the same year that First National moved out of there and moved over to the West Central Street when they built the building that is today's Black Box. And then W.T. Grant expanded into there.
Jeannie, did you work in the ice cream shop, on that ice cream shop in there?
No,
You never worked there?
no, but I worked at J.J. Newberry's, $1 an hour.
That was a lot of money.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Boy, they overpaid you.
And then there's the White Star Cafe.
Gee, 1964, 3?
And now this is
I was getting $1 an hour in '73.
This is the Sentinel building down on Depot Street. This is where the trading post used to be. Vera and Bud Ledberry had that.
Good enough to go on the service, I got a service.
Now this was taken up from the furniture building up on the hill across from the train station. And the arrow's pointing to it. It was known as the Blackmar building. Back in the early 1900s, a guy named Thomas F. Keefe managed a laundry in there. It was called the Modern Laundry. And then he went on to the New England School of Anatomy and Sanitary Science in Boston so that he could become an undertaker. And then he eventually established the Keefe Funeral Home on Cottage Street. And there's the coal elevator. This is the W.K. Gilmore coal yard.
Oh, yeah, remember that.
You remember that? I lived across the street from on Dean Avenue, and I used to play in that yard, get all dirty and everything. I used to go ride my bicycle underneath the coal elevator. It was really cool.
Kids would go in there, because we do like a building,
Yeah.
and you go in there and it makes.
What's that chute, Joe?
Oh, the chute? That's where the coal used to go up. See the railroad car down there? The coal car? There was a pit down underneath. The railroad car would open up underneath. The coal would fall into a pit. And that conveyor, the conveyor thing went down into that pit, and the coal used to go up into the bin, and then it would drop. And the building was up on stilts. The dump truck would drive underneath and dump the coal in, and away you go. Yeah. Then where the train stop, a lot of us remember the train stop,
Oh, yeah.
and Ski's Lounge, and the 140 Club. That's what that was. Huh?
It was a Tin Pony, wasn't it?
I don't know about that.
Bar of the Tin Pony, do you remember that?
Oh, I don't remember that one. No. But it was, you can see it was called the American House. At different times, it was like a rooming house. They had one person that lived in there. His name was Joe Lazzarini at one point. Yeah. Joe lived there for a while, yeah. Yeah. Now, the two buildings that I point to in red were constructed around 1889 or so. Now, maybe in the early 1900s. In 1935, the Oddfellows bought these two buildings. The one on the right, they would use as their headquarters. The one on the left, they would rent out. And then the big blue one, the big building with the blue arrow, was the second Ray block. And that was constructed in 1889. The Oddfellows had a hall up on the second floor. And Austin Chilson moved his meat market into there. And of course, in later years, Fico Shoe Store would move in there. Disty DeCecco would have his tailor shop in there. Yeah. The Trading Post would actually be in there at one point, and so on. Yeah. Now up on Main Street, we had the first Ray block, and this is before Dean Avenue extended from Ray Street to Main Street. It didn't at that time. It was all land. So this building was sat right there. And if you look to the left of the building, all you see is land, no houses. They hadn't been built yet.
Joe, what
Right on Main Street, where Dean Bank is today.
year is that?
I'm guessing it was that's when it was just finished, 1873. Yep. The first tenants in there were the Franklin National Bank, and the post office was there. Franklin National Bank would eventually become Norfolk County.
Oh, that became Norfolk County?
Yep. Now here's a picture that shows where the arrow that went down to the lower level, where the barber shop was. Here are the different barbers that were there. Bill Jordan, Sully Sr. and Sully Jr.
Taxi stand was down there.
That's right, that's right, yep, yep, yep. How many people remember getting a haircut when Sully Jr., and you could look in the mirror, and you had the hall of mirrors where it was like the effect was the mirror in the front and mirror behind, and it was just like one big hall of mirrors. It was really something. It was only on Sully Jr.'s chair. And then on Dean Avenue side, we had the F&F Laundrette was there. We had the Country Kitchen was there, Art's Coffee Shop, that was Arthur Remillard, Sonny Remillard. College Pizza was there, DeMeglio's Pizza was there. Oh, and then,
Was there too,
oh.
right? Didn't something else started there?
no, on the next slide, yep, 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 right there, yep.
Oh, yeah,
Joe D'Addario had his plumbing business there.
that's where he started, right.
Oh, well, there you go. And then Peter Pilastri took it over. And then I guess, yeah, Pimpinell's was, now where was Pimpinell's? In the left side over here? Right in there? Okay. Yeah.
You don't have that truck still, do you?
Nah. Now, the number 47, that building is at 29 Dean Avenue. And in 1883, a guy named Henry Jenks established a jewelry corporation there. And then in later years, he got together with Daniel Cotton, and they established a grocery store in there. And then in the 1890s, the Smith Carriage Company did business there. And then in the 50s, Anthony Duke Yadicinia established a Vet Med Supply there. Yep. And right across the street was my house. And right around the corner was somebody, let's see, the Socies lived there, I think, yeah.
Pepper's is still in business, isn't it, for that now?
No, yeah, well, they moved down to West Central Street.
Yeah.
And they're not owned by the Yadicinias anymore.
No,
Yeah,
the one
but-
that owned it, I think he bought it.
Oh, yeah, yeah, but Duke established that in the early 50s. Yep. Now this building, this was constructed as a YMCA, but a lot of us remember it as the Masonic Hall. Now, when you look at this building, you have to say, well, okay, what architect would design a building like that? I mean, look at all these different curves and angles and everything. Why was it built like that? Well, apparently in 1910, they wanted to build a YMCA, and they said, well, Harry Haywood owned the house on the corner of Dean Avenue, said, hey, I've got this shed in the back, an old garage, you can use that for part of the YMCA. So he donated it. That's what that is, that building right there. And then they built the gymnasium over on the Emmett Street side, and then they connected the two together. So that's why it's a funky looking building. Yep. And then in 1938, the YMCA was falling on hard times, and then the Masons took it over, and that's when it became Excelsior Lodge. And in 2011, destroyed by fire. Wow. Yeah. There's that house on the corner. That was owned by a guy named Charles Mackenzie, and then he sold it to Harry Haywood. And then in the 1930s, a new post office was proposed for that site. But before they built the post office, they moved that house from the corner of Dean Avenue to the corner of Emmett Street. They moved the house over, and then they built the post office. Yeah. And then in the 50s, they tore the house down to build the Norfolk County Trust Company, which we'll see in a second. But there's the post office. And during the 60s, I was working for Duke Yadisini at Vet Med, and we had all these packages. We had to go to the post office. But the post office was closed temporarily because they were expanding it. They were doubling it in size. So temporarily, the post office moved over to Emmett Street into the gym. And I remember walking through there and bringing the packages over there. And then the Norfolk County Trust Company. And then in the mid-50s, that's when that happened. In May of '66, they added the drive-up window, which was kind of a new concept for the banks. Yeah. Now, we got to turn around. We got a whip-a-Yui here. And that was, believe it or not, that was a legal turnaround spot. I saw something in the Sentinel that said that was a legal turnaround. And how many of us did it? Oh, we all used it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody used it.
So there we go.
Yes, we did.
So now we're going to head back to the Tom Bridge. But it was built as Dean Cooperative Bank. Now, let's think about this. Dean Cooperative Bank started at where the first Ray block is, where today's Dean Bank is. It started off as Dean Cooperative Bank, and then in 1950, they built this building and they moved over to here. And then in the 80s, they moved back to their original spot. Bob Valley. Bob Valley's there today. But Bob Valley started on the second floor of the Ray block. And then he ultimately took over this spot. But it gets better. When they tore down the Ray block in 1970, he took possession of the big chime clock, and he kept it, and he meticulously restored it. And then he donated it back to the bank when they moved back. And it sits up on a pedestal to this day. That's the original clock. But it doesn't chime, though. It's kind of sad. Too bad he didn't make it chime like it used to. You know, it was a typical Westminster chime. Bum, 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 bum. So then we get to here, and this is the A.B. Fletcher block. This is where Connie's drugstore was. And
What building was it that Howard Abbott was in?
Well,
I remember going up to see him up on the 3rd floor.
I think, okay, yeah, was that over Puritan drugs?
Over Puritan Drugs.
Okay, it's over Puritan drugs. We'll get to that one, but yeah, okay, I wasn't sure about that one.
That's where Dina was at.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. But this is this block.
Good lawyer, that guy.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Now, this building was built in 1890 by Austin Barclay Fletcher. Now, there was a little cottage on this spot. They had to move it out of there before. And here's a picture from 1888. It shows that little cottage. That's what the arrow's pointing to. Apparently, that cottage had been moved there from South Franklin. And it was reported that Dr. Oliver Dean was born in that house. Now, you can imagine my delight when I pointed that out to Dr. Rob Lawson, the Dean history professor, and he didn't know that. I taught him something. Whoa, wow. So that was cool. So they moved the cottage out of there, and then they built the block there. Now, the two arrows are pointing to the AA Fletcher block. So we have the AA Fletcher block and the AB Fletcher block. I don't think there's an AC Fletcher block, but if there is, whatever. So these two buildings were built around the same time, around 1875 or so. But here's the interesting thing. The smaller building, the one on the right, was built first. And it was built where the bigger building is. No sooner did they finish it, they said, you know, we kind of like that spot. Let's move the building over to this spot, and then they'll build the second building. Yeah,
But they thought nothing of moving buildings.
I know it. I know it. Oh, I'm telling you.
Brick building?
I know it. Well, what, was Compton around then, back then? I don't know. So anyway, that's what happened there. And then the smaller building was torn down in the early 50s for the Benjamin Franklin Savings Bank.
Oh, I remember the front.
And then today, that's the Rockland Trust.
Yes.
Now that arrow is pointing to the Chilson.
Then they screwed up all the parking, then they decided to change the parking, then they put it back twice. Remember, I think they did it twice, that they changed it, then they put it back, then they changed it, then they put it back.
That's from 1890, that car.
Is it really? Okay. Yeah, because I'm thinking this picture dates back. Well, this picture dates back to before 1913, and I know that because the arrow's pointing to a building that is called the Chilson Block.
Oh, yeah, look at the way they parked the cars there, they parked it that way,
Yeah.
then they parked it angled,
Huh, yeah.
then they parked it the other way,
Yeah.
and now they park it,
Well, the Chilson Block was there.
well, they park it buggy-wise.
Yeah. Now that's the building that was there. You can see A.C. Dana was in the Fletcher Block. Eventually, Dana would build his own block down here, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But this is the Chilson Block. Now, in 1912, Mr. Chilson said, you know something, I'm going to add a floor to the building, and I'm going to coat it in a stucco, the same kind of stucco that the YMCA was done over. And it just happened that A. Simon & Son had just started their business in this building in 1912. No sooner did they start, they had to get out. That's when they moved down the street temporarily till their new building was built. But before they really started doing the work, they said, Mr. Chilson said, you know something, let's just tear it down and let's put up a brick building instead. And that's what they did. The idea being they were going to move the post office into that building from the Ray block. And that's what they did. And there's a post office down the first floor. Yeah. And then eventually the post office moved over to their new spot, and then the Davis department store moved in there, and then eventually Charlie Hooper and Thunderbird Cleaners would be in there. Now today, that building, 1/3 of it still exists, the bottom floor. They took off the top 2 floors and they added a roof to the bottom one, and that's what's there today. You can just see it there, right next to the.
Why did they take the top 2 floors off?
That's a good question. I'm not even sure who did it. I know Dr. Snetsky, Harvey Snetsky, did he own that building?
I thought he did.
Yeah, and maybe he was the one that did it. I was out of Franklin by then, so I don't know who
They
did it.
never rented that out again. There's
Oh, they never
nobody
did?
in there.
Oh, okay.
John the Barber.
John moved in there, and I think Milford Daily News, I
Yeah,
think, moved.
John the Barber was
Yeah.
there, but now
And now Rockland Trust owns it. Now, this is the Felix J. Cataldo block. It was built in 1907, and
Joe, who was Joe J. Davis? Any idea?
who?
That's J. Davis Square. Who was J.
Davis Square. I don't know.
Go back a spot.
Yep.
See the sign.
Rentham has Davis.
J. Davis, yeah. I really don't know. That's a good question. I'll say this, with the gold star, he had to have died in the service. Yeah,
Oh, it must have been a service,
yeah, he died in service, because you see the gold star.
had to be a service person.
Exactly, yeah. Now, you see those 2 white buildings and then the building next to it? Those were torn down for the Felix Cataldo block. The building on the right was a hotel. It was the Hotel Darling. A guy named Nathan Darling established that in 1886. And there it is. Yeah. And then those 2 buildings, Smith's News Store was there, and then there was a barber. I'm not sure if that was deceased at that time or not, but then they tore them down. There's the Hotel Windsor Hotel Dowling then became Hotel Windsor. There it is, about to be demolished to make way for the Felix Cataldo block. Oh, I wonder who that guy is. That's Dan Croster. Debbie knows who that is. A very good cop.
Good father family
There you go. Now this is where the Dana block sits today, where Teddy Gallagher's is. But here's something that's really strange. This house was, this building was built in 1876, and in 1893, Albert Dana decided he wanted to build his 3-story building there. But they had to get this thing out of the way. They didn't want to demolish it, so I bet you'll never guess what they did with it. They moved it. But what do you think they did? They moved it back and turned it at a 45-degree angle. And there it is. But because the Dana block was going to be that big, they said, well, we better chop off a corner of the building. And that's what they did. Yeah. Yep. And that building was there even into the 1940s. And there it is. Imagine that, huh?
It's not there anymore.
Now, this picture is really cool. This was taken from the fire station tower by Stanley Chilson. This is from one of his films. I mean, look at the building. You can just see the curved roof of the diner. You can see the American Felt Mill down there in Alpine Place. Huh?
St. Herbie Stewart's print shop.
Yeah, that's probably that. Yep, that's okay. That's it. Yep. The lumber yard, obviously. Yeah, so that's kind of cool, huh? Yeah. And there's another one, downtown Franklin. You can see the Dana block. That's, yeah. There's a more recent one. Who was the pharmacist?
Ray Neighbor.
Ray Neighbor. Yeah. Before him was Bob Howe.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in the mid-'70s, they had a fire on the 3rd floor. And they were able to save the building, obviously, and now it's only a 2-story building. And yes, there's Herb Stewart, the man, the legend. Over 70 consecutive years, he played taps on his bugle for the Memorial Day parades. He said he refused business on that day because he wanted to make sure he kept his record going. And he walked the route, too. He went to both cemeteries and the Common. He walked that route till later years. He's all right, I'll ride.
Fire chief.
The diner.
I remember that time.
Oh, yeah.
Room with a key.
Yeah.
Open all day.
Oh, and night, yep.
Okay, no longer.
Now there were, over the years, there were 3 diners in that spot. The first one was put there in 1898 by a guy named Willis Fairfield. And then a couple of years later, he sold it to Charlie Lawrence. And around 1907, Charlie Lawrence replaced it with a second diner. In 1926, there was a company up in Worcester. It's called the Worcester Lunch Cart Diner. And that's what that is. There's still one up in Worcester, too. It's on Broadway.
Over to the Rome restaurant.
Yeah,
Was there a Kaba diner there?
yeah, there was. It was
And I had to go down the basement when they were doing the excavating.
yeah,
And they couldn't dig any further because there was stone.
okay.
And it was a frame of tin building.
Oh, wow,
And I asked Gino, I said, what the hell is this? He goes, oh, that's the old restaurant.
wow.
And that's the way I left it.
Huh, okay. Hmm.
They
Interesting.
couldn't get it out. They'd have to dig to the railroad tracks to get it
Interesting.
out.
Wow, well, we're going to talk about that
They
building.
just cemented it or
Yeah.
blocked it out or something. I don't know what they did after.
Yeah.
It was there.
Because we are going to talk about that building, but wow, that's interesting. Huh,
Well, it was interesting.
Yeah.
There's gotta be something there.
right.
Hey, Joe, what year picture is that?
Okay, this was 1932. Now, it was called the Franklin Diner at that time.
When did they take that out?
I'm thinking around mid to late 80s. Now, in 1938, the Franklin Diner, Charlie Lawrence decided to sell the Franklin Diner to 2 people, Carlton Mason and Elmer Fleming. But as with everybody else in Franklin, they had nicknames. Buzzer Mason and Bozo Fleming. Buzzer and Bozo, B&B.
Too bad they didn't keep that diner.
Buzzer and Bozo.
Too bad they didn't keep it.
Oh, I worked there in high school. Believe me, I would have loved that.
Buzzer Mason sold cars for sure.
Yes, he did. He used to wear that cowboy hat and beautifully dressed. One time I was down at Sully's getting a haircut, and Buzzer had just gotten through getting a haircut from Sully Senior, and of course Buzzer had a toupee. So he puts the toupee back on. He's dead now, so I guess I can say it. Sully says to him, "Hey, Buzzy, you still got that thing in your wallet?" He goes, "Yeah, you want to see it?" "Sure." He reaches into his wallet. Do you know what he was carrying around with him? A $1,000 bill. A legitimate $1,000 bill. And he carried it around with him.
What's there now?
They stopped that $1,000.
Well, I'm not sure if it's still legal tender or not, but probably only banks exchange them. Who the heck would want to carry one around, though?
What's in that building now?
There's not, well, what happened was, when they tore it out of there, and then Victor Pizzini now owns the block, he added on to his store with a brick addition. And then this is the Metcalf block. Now, the Metcalf block up at the second floor had a music hall up there. And then in the 20s, they converted it into offices. But when it was a music hall, that's where, when A. Simon and Son had to move out of the Chilson block, temporarily he moved up onto the second floor until his building across the street was built in 1914. Now, in 1907, when they tore down the Hotel Windsor, Julius Burns had a clothing store, and he had to get out of there. He moved up to the Metcalf block until the new Cataldo block was built, at which time Julius Burns moved his business back, and then in 1929, he sold his business to Louis Cataldo. And then you can see the Sears Roebuck store. Mary Hill used to work in there. You could call in your order, and then it'll be there waiting for you. If you look way down, you can see the Mighty Good pastry shop that was there. And then you can see where Rizzoli Pharmacy was there, and Dean Jewelers was next to it. And you can see the B&B Diner sign.
Was that the catalog store?
Yes, it was a catalog store.
Then they moved over to where
Kind of weird going there and
where,
finding people in the street.
you know, where that,
This is way back.
supermarket was.
That's right. Yep, that's right. Yep. Who's that police officer? Lester Talamini. Yep. Yep. And now you can see Aubuchon has taken over. Yep.
Never did like them after that.
And then that building was built in 1889. Yep. The Brockton Taunton Gas Company used to be in there. And then there's the Mighty Good pastry shop. Okay. And then this building, Bill Jordan had his barber shop in there. And then they tore that down and replaced it. Oh, and then there's Ethan Allen Moore had a shoe store right next to it. And then it was taken over by one of his employees when he got sick, Bill Doherty. And then they're going to tear this whole block down. All those buildings, they're going to tear them down to build what I call the Flax block. A guy named Henry Flax bought the block. And that's what, then they built, and then they built that. This thing's on automatic pilot here. And then looking down from Google Earth, you can see the U shape of the building. The arrow is pointing to a building that was added where that other building was torn out. Oop, wait a minute. What's going on here? Yep, that was there. That was behind it. That was, yeah. There was a cleaners in there. Walnut Hill Cleaners were in there. And then Western Auto was there.
We said Hercules, it was Styles, huh?
Oh, I know it, huh? Then the lumberyard was in the back. Yeah. Franklin Lumber, Adam McIntosh and Don McIntosh owned it. Yeah. And then we have the First National Store. That's from 1946 when they moved over there. And then this building was further down. Lemuel Milliken had a leather shop in there. That was right across from East Street. And the town hall, now it's the museum. And we'll go around and we'll head back on towards Lola's. Wiggins Funeral Home was on the corner. Yeah. And down East Street, there was a garage, the Cody Garage. In 1938, they had a big fire, and they rebuilt it. And then in 1922, they built the fire station. And you can see the GAR Hall. That was originally a school, and then, yeah. Who knows the name of that bar? Yeah, the Abruzzi Club. And what was underneath the Abruzzi Club?
Charlie Guerra's gas station, go.
Charlie Guerra, that's right.
Guerra.
Yep, Charlie Guerra. He became the fire chief too, I think, right? Yeah.
The A&P right there.
Yep, the A&P. There's Charlie right in the doorway. Now, the A&P. Right. Now, this was originally built as a 40-car garage for storage, and it even had a little car wash in there too. Now, if you look up the top, it says C.L. Harris. Carl Harris is the one that built that, because he had the garage next to it, which was this one. And then in later years, people like Waddy Young, Connie Shaw, Boyle and Gazzola, and then eventually, the old Colony Station was there. And then Greg DeBadges gave me permission to use this, and there he is pumping gas.
Who's that pumping?
Greg DeBadges.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then this building was on the corner there. A guy named Reardon had a shoe store in there. And then Horace Mazzone took it over. Yeah. And then there's the Rome restaurant block. Okay. That building was built as a barber shop for Edward E. King. And later Bullocken took it over. The middle building, that was originally built as a grocery store, and eventually it became a pool room and a little bowling alley in there. And then finally it became the Clark Square Diner when the Brunellis owned it. And then in 1948, they turned it into Brunelli's Diner when they totally redid it over. And then in the 50s, a guy named Nunzio Bonina bought it and became Kami's Restaurant. And then in 1965, the Colaci family bought it and it became the Rome Restaurant. And then this building, the Nile Bakery was there. William Enegren had a bakery in there too. And then in later years, Victor Pizzini would move his shoe store in there. And Soxy DeCecco would have a furniture store in there.
Yes.
What about Bilzerian's Market?
Oh, okay. Well, somewhere in there was that. Yeah, okay. Yeah. And then the Tip Top Shoe Hospital. Now, the Sal's Barbershop, that was Sal Di Lorenzo. And then the Tip Top Shoe Hospital was owned by Ernest Bonifazi. And then in the late 40s, he hired a young man named Victor Pizzini. And then he sold the business to Victor in 1950. But Victor was telling me, no sooner did that happen, the Korean War called him. So his brother took over until he got back from the war. And then we know Victor moved the store over to where he is today. And then around the corner on Cottage Street, there was this Franklin Seafoods. And then in this building was the Crossing Cycle. The Maccheronis were there. Louis Maccheroni Sr. and Charlie Maccheroni. And they used to sell model airplanes too, gas model airplanes. And that was a big hobby with, certainly with Louis Jr. too. Who remembers a cobbler that was there? Mr. Falcon, right. Now, Falcon D'Amico, or D'Amico Falcon. I always wondered, what was his first name? Was it Falcon or was it D'Amico? So I saw his gravestone at St. Mary's. It says D'Amico. So I'm assuming Falcon was his first name. But then again, who knows?
He lived in the back.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And then Tom Keefe bought this house in 1918, and he established his Keefe Funeral Home there. Then Edward Mulvaney, Edward Mulvaney took it over, and then Fred Pizzini took it over, and then Charlie Dottieri took it over.
Mulvaney, did you say Mulvaney?
Edward Mulvaney, yeah. Now across the street was the Chapman garage, Donald Chapman. I'm assuming that the guy in the far right in the suit was Donald Chapman. Can anybody verify that? I'm thinking that must have been him. Yeah, it's just an assumption.
They don't look at it.
And then next to it was this building.
It's backyard.
This is where a guy. Yeah, Kevin Carlo has his place there today. But Herbert Sherman established his Chevrolet dealership there. If you look carefully, you can see Sherman Chevrolet. Then they moved down to East Central Street. And then,
Boyertown Casket, wasn't it?
and and Boyertown Casket was there too, yes. Yep.
Mr.
Yep. And then, are we okay with time, Meredith? We're a little over. Is that going to be a problem? Is that going to be a problem? I got about 5 or 10 more minutes. Okay. Okay. So that garage is where the Chapman garage was. And then you can see the Morse block. There's the Morse block. The Morse Opera House block was constructed in 1886 and opened in 1887. Now the building that's there on the corner is still there. However, the top floor is gone, as is the tower clock, the clock tower, because it had a big fire there. We'll see that in a second. Now the arrow's pointing to the store where Harry Bullocken Sr. started business. It was called the Franklin Cash Store. He sold coal and things like that out of that store, but also other things. And but in 1943, food rationing caused him to have to close up the business, but he kept the coal and oil business going with his 2 sons, Harry Jr. and Arthur Bullocken. So they took over that part of the business. And then there's the Morse Opera House block. Then in February 1928, the Morse Opera House went up in flames. And Louise Costello was at the piano, and it was during a kids' show in the afternoon. But she played lively music on the piano, and the kids all filed out. There was one child in there who was about 16 years old. His name was Woodrow Woody Abbott. Imagine that. Woody Abbott was in there. Imagine that. Yep. So this is what it looked like afterwards. Yep. And then they rebuilt the block. Now, think about this. The fire happened in February. By May, the stores were already going in there. Imagine that. And in October, yeah. And in October, the movie theater was opening. I know it. It's unbelievable. And in 1931, they added all sound equipment, and the talkies came to Franklin.
What year was that?
Well, in 1931 for the talkies. Yep. And then you got the Morse Theater there, Danello's Market. Yep.
Too bad the theater's
Yeah, I know it.
So who used to manage it? Jimmy who? The theater?
Oh, Austin. Austin, yep. Oh, and there was Walter Mitchell, I think, also was involved in that too. Yeah, that's right. Now, who knew we had a radio station in Franklin? WMOO.
I remember it.
Yep. And then for the opening thing there, they brought a cow in. Yep. The Onion. Yep. Darlene's Donuts. Yep.
Darlene's Donuts.
Now here's Summer Street. That building on the side there is 9 Summer Street. A lot of car dealerships started there. Simmons Ford was there. Simmons Ford became Bassett Ford, and we know the rest of that story. Supple Motors began there. Hunchard began there until they moved down to Hunchard's Curve. So all kinds of business started there.
I remember Bassett.
Yeah, Bassett Ford. Yeah. And then there's a garage that held 35 cars. Yeah. And then across the street was the Morse garage, and eventually that became Brown's garage. Yeah. And then that's when he did it over in 1952. And then on the other side was Carl Harris built a garage over there. It eventually became Lindy's service station, and then Ken's Gulf. And then they've torn them.
Brown's was on the right?
Brown's is on the corner, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't remember.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And then you've got Simon and Sons. You got Ranieri's Plumbing there. Lucy Negroni used to have Lucy's House of Beauty there. Yeah. And then this is down on East Central Street, where the Arnold Baker garage was. Then in 1950, Dante Bracci would take it over and become Dante Motors. Yep. That house was moved over to King Street.
Stubitz?
Yeah, went past the greenhouse, and they went as the eagle flies. And then they built this gas station.
Yeah. They move clothes around like checkers.
I know it, huh? Yep. Johnny's Groceries. Yep.
Yeah,
And now it's DeVita's Market. And there's the Bradelli's Market that was original, 1954.
That Morse family, were they related to the Morses in Rentham? Because that was a big family.
Yeah,
Have the
it's
farms.
it's a good question. Yeah, I know, it's a good question, I'm not really sure.
Because they had stuff going on in the center of Rentham too.
Right, oh, yeah, right, yeah. And then, back in 1949, Al Fico opened a driving range down on East Central Street. You remember that? Yeah. And then in '54, he established a bowling alley.
Ice cream stand too, you're right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they'll count those signs and make the rest.
And then in '51, Herbert Sherman moved his business down to there. He eventually became Pierce Chevrolet and then Keegan Chevrolet. And we're back at Lola's.
There we go.
And that's the end.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors. Good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.